started with a laugh. We were halfway through dessert at Thanksgiving, the table cluttered with half-empty wine glasses and pumpkin pie plates. My brother had just finished explaining his latest promotion, new title, new office, bigger bonus. My mother nodded proudly. My father raised his glass. "And what about you?" my brother said, turning to me with that familiar smirk. "Still playing with robots?" A few relatives chuckled. "It's artificial intelligence," I said evenly. He waved his fork dismissively. "So, still jobless?" The word lingered longer than it should have. Jobless. As if my work only counted if it came with a building badge and a company parking spot. Someone at the table laughed louder this time. My aunt added, "You'll figure it out eventually." Eventually. I took a sip of water and held my expression steady. "I'll consult," I said calmly. "For who?" he pressed. "ChatGPT." More laughter. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I didn't explain revenue streams or contract structures. That would have required them to listen. Instead, I let the moment pass. Because what he didn't know was that his company was already on my radar. My brother has always been easy for my parents to explain. He graduated with a business degree, joined a recognizable corporation, and climbed in the way people understand. Analyst, manager, director, vice president. Each title came with a new LinkedIn announcement, a family dinner toast, and my mother repeating the phrase, "He's always been so stable." Stable. In our house, stability meant visible employment. A badge. A benefits package. A predictable commute. My path made them nervous. I left my last corporate role after realizing the real shift was happening outside traditional departments. AI wasn't just a tool. It was restructuring industries in real time. I started consulting with small companies, first helping them automate workflows, analyze customer data, and redesign operations before larger competitors caught up. To my family, that sounded vague. "So you freelance?" my father asked once. "Consult," I corrected. My brother laughed. "Same thing with more confidence." He worked in a glass building with his name on a directory. I worked from home, airports, client sites, and late-night strategy calls. His success looked official. Mine looked scattered. At birthdays, my parents asked about his quarterly targets. They asked me if I was still doing the AI thing. The AI thing. They didn't see the contracts. The retainers. The companies quietly paying for expertise they would later pretend they had always understood. My brother's path was praised because it fit the old map. Mine was dismissed because I was drawing a new one. That was the contrast they never questioned. He represented security. I represented uncertainty. And families, especially image-conscious ones, often mistake familiarity for competence. I didn't argue with them. I built it instead. While my brother refined presentations in conference rooms with frosted glass doors, I was writing code at midnight and testing automation systems for clients who didn't want publicity, only efficiency. The first year was unstable. I'll admit that. Contracts were short. Payments came in waves. I reinvested almost everything into better infrastructure, security, data compliance certifications. There was no steady paycheck to show my parents, no HR badge to scan at a turnstile. But there were results. A logistics firm cut operational costs by 20% after implementing one of my optimization models. A retail startup scaled distribution without adding staff because of a predictive system I built. The work wasn't glamorous. It was transformative. I registered the consulting firm quietly. I hired 2 data engineers on contract. I didn't announce it at Christmas. I didn't update my family group chat. To them, nothing had changed. "You're still freelancing?" my brother asked once the word freelancing stretched thin with condescension. "It's consulting," I corrected. "Same thing," he said with a shrug. "Same thing." My parents echoed it in softer ways. "She's very creative," my mother would say when someone asked what I did. "She's trying something new." Trying. As if profitability were accidental. They didn't see the quarterly invoices. They didn't know my client roster included mid-sized corporations adapting to automation mandates. They didn't understand that my revenue had quietly surpassed my brother's salary. Not because I hid it. Because I didn't need their validation. To them, my career was a phase. To me, it was infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't look impressive until something collapses without it. The first rumor reached me through an industry newsletter, not through my brother. Major restructuring expected in regional logistics sector, the headline read. I skimmed the article casually at first, but the details sharpened quickly. Rising automation adoption, declining manual operations, cost pressures, companies scrambling to implement AI solutions they had previously dismissed as premature. My brother's company was mentioned by name. At Thanksgiving, he had described their model as stable, insulated from disruption. He believed legacy systems carried permanence. The market disagreed. Within weeks, LinkedIn posts began appearing from employees at his firm's carefully worded statements about organizational realignment and exploring new opportunities. The language was sanitized, but the message was clear. Layoffs, departments under review, investors pressing for modernization. My brother didn't bring it up directly, but I noticed the shift in his tone during family calls. Less certainty, more qualifiers. We're evaluating options, he said once when my father asked about performance. Just precautionary. Precautionary. I knew better. AI wasn't optional anymore. It was competitive survival. Companies that resisted it were being acquired or absorbed. Those who adopted it without expertise were hemorrhaging capital. His industry was overdue for disruption. The irony wasn't satisfying. It was predictable. For years my work had been dismissed as abstract, experimental, non-essential. Now the companies that once ignored automation were scrambling to integrate it overnight. And integration when rushed requires expertise. Expertise that doesn't laugh at Thanksgiving dinner. The structural tension wasn't emotional. It was economic. And economic tension doesn't care about pride. Cares about adaptation. His company would need consultants soon. The only question was whether they would recognize the value before it was too late. It appeared on a Tuesday morning. A glossy corporate graphic with bold lettering. Excited to announce our strategic AI transformation initiative. I paused mid-scroll. The logo at the top of the post was unmistakable. My brother's company. The caption beneath it was written in the polished tone of crisis disguised as opportunity. Leveraging innovative technologies to streamline operations and enhance efficiency across departments. Enhance efficiency. Streamline operations. The words were familiar. I clicked into the attached press release. They had partnered with a small, relatively unknown tech vendor to implement predictive logistics automation across multiple divisions. The timeline was aggressive. The language is overly confident. And the technical description was shallow. They were using buzzwords where architecture should have been detailed. Referencing AI-driven insights without specifying data infrastructure. Announcing deployment phases without acknowledging integration testing. It read like urgency, not strategy. I leaned back in my chair and opened the comments section. Industry professionals were congratulating them publicly. But beneath the surface-level praise I saw the skepticism. Bold timeline. Interested to see scalability metrics. Will this integrate with legacy ERP systems? Those weren't compliments. They were warnings. I knew exactly what would happen next. Implementation would hit friction. Internal teams would resist change. Cost overruns would accumulate. And someone at the executive level would realize they needed experienced oversight. Oversight they had once laughed at. I closed the press release and checked the vendor's portfolio. Small contracts. Limited enterprise deployments. No evidence of large-scale integration success. This wasn't a transformation. It was a reaction. And reactions without structure are expensive. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt prepared. Because companies don't pivot gracefully when pride leads the planning. They call consultants. Eventually. And when they did, they would need more than marketing language. They would need someone who understood both systems and scale. Someone they once described as jobless. The first real signal didn't come from a press release. It came from a former colleague who now worked in procurement at my brother's company. We hadn't spoken in months, but his message was brief and direct. Are you seeing what's happening over here? I called him immediately. They pushed the rollout too fast, he said quietly. Data mapping issues. Forecasting errors. Warehouse delays. It's not integrating with legacy systems. Not integrating. The phrase carried weight. They underestimated the architectural gap, he added. We're patching instead of restructuring. I knew exactly what that meant. Temporary fixes layered over incompatible systems. Costly. Unstable. How bad? I asked. He hesitated. Executives are calling emergency sessions. There's talk of external consultants. External consultants. I opened my dashboard and reviewed industry chatter. Delayed shipments. Client complaints. Stock fluctuations. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the pressure curve was rising. My brother hadn't mentioned any of this during family calls. His tone remained composed, controlled, which meant the situation was worse than it sounded. Integration failures rarely announce themselves publicly until they're undeniable. They begin as internal friction, quiet escalations, closed-door meetings, and then they accelerate. The irony was no longer theoretical. The company that had once dismissed AI as experimental was now experiencing what happens when you deploy it without structural depth. This wasn't sabotage. It was inevitable. Companies don't need optimism during a crisis. They need architecture. And architecture requires precision. The kind built slowly. The kind developed by people who don't measure worth through titles alone. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. If they were going to call someone, it would be soon. And when they did, they wouldn't be laughing. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m. before the rest of my inbox had fully populated. The sender address was generictalent@operationsgroup.com. Subject line: Consulting Inquiry, Urgent. I opened it without expectation. Good morning, it began. We are exploring external advisory support for ongoing AI integration challenges. We would like to discuss potential engagement. The signature block made me pause. Operations Group. My brother's company. I read it again, slower this time. The language was restrained. No admission of failure. Just optimization support. And efficiency realignment. Efficiency realignment. They were already reframing the narrative. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the skyline outside my office window. They didn't address me by name personally. The message had been sent to my firm's general contact address. They didn't know. At least not yet. I forwarded the email internally to my senior strategist with a simple note: preliminary review. Then I opened the attachment. A brief summary of integration concerns. Supply chain modeling inconsistencies. Forecasting instability. Data latency issues. Everything I expected. What they didn't know was that I had already analyzed their rollout timeline weeks earlier. I checked the CC field. My brother wasn't included. That meant one of two things. Either he wasn't leading the solution, or he was trying to contain it. The shock wasn't emotional. It was structural. The company that once dismissed my work had just requested it. Quietly. An urgency was embedded between the lines. The conference room was colder than necessary. Glass walls. Long table. A screen at the front displaying a slide titled AI Stabilization Strategy. I entered 5 minutes early. No announcement. No dramatic reveal. Just another consultant stepping into a corporate review. 2 executives were already seated. A senior operations director. The head of compliance. Then the door opened again. My brother walked in. He stopped when he saw me. Not visibly at first. Just a fraction of a second longer in his step. A recalculation behind his eyes. He began. Yes, I replied calmly. I'm leading this engagement. The silence wasn't hostile. It was precise. He glanced around the table as if searching for confirmation. The senior operations director nodded slightly. We retained her firm, he said. She'll be overseeing the integration review. Overseeing. My brother's posture shifted subtly from executive confidence to contained uncertainty. You're consulting on this? He asked. I am. No elaboration. No reference to Thanksgiving. The presentation began. I outlined the structural gaps in their rollout. Data mapping errors. Redundant operational layers. Vendor misalignment. The language was technical. Objective. Detached. When I clicked to the slide projecting potential cost overruns, the room grew quieter. These numbers are conservative, I said evenly. Without structural correction, escalation is likely. My brother spoke carefully. You believe this can be stabilized? Yes, I replied. But not through patchwork. Patchwork. The word hung in the air. He leaned back in his chair. So what's your recommendation? I didn't hesitate. Restructure the rollout architecture. Reallocate budget toward system integration. Freeze non-essential expansion initiatives until stabilization is complete. His jaw tightened slightly. Expansion initiatives. He had championed those. The inversion wasn't theatrical. It was operational. Years ago he told me I wasn't built for pressure. Now he was watching me navigate his crisis without raising my voice. No gloating. No reminders. Just competence. Authority doesn't require repetition. It requires clarity. And clarity had shifted the room. Not through humiliation. Through structure. He didn't argue. He took notes. And for the first time in years he wasn't leading the conversation. He was following it. The room didn't erupt. There were no raised voices, no defensive speeches. There was just silence. Not the awkward kind. The recalibrating kind. My brother stared at the slide still projected on the screen. His name had been attached to the original rollout proposal months earlier. Now the flaws were outlined clinically without accusation. The executives were no longer looking at him for direction. They were looking at me. Can you implement this within the quarter? The compliance head asked. Yes, I replied. If we prioritize stabilization over optics. Optics. The word carried weight. My brother shifted in his chair. I'll need to review the numbers, he said carefully. Of course, I answered. There was no edge in my tone. No reminder of Thanksgiving. But the contrast hung between us. At dinner he had asked if I was still jobless. Now he was asking for my framework. The hierarchy didn't collapse dramatically. It adjusted quietly. The room recognized authority based on competence, not family narrative. My brother wasn't humiliated. He was confronted with structure. And the structure doesn't laugh. It recalculates. When the meeting ended, the executives remained seated discussing next steps with me. He stayed silent. Not defeated. Aware. And awareness is quieter than embarrassment. But far more permanent. The proposal wasn't personal. It was precise. I sent over the consulting agreement that afternoon. Scope of work clearly defined. Timeline structured. Compensation aligned with urgency. No inflated fees. No punitive clauses. Just professional terms. The head of operations reviewed it first. Reasonable, he said during our follow-up call. Given the complexity. Given the complexity. My brother was on the call, but he spoke less than usual. We'll need expedited onboarding, he added. That's included, I replied. Provided documentation is transparent. Transparent. The word was intentional. He paused before responding. Understood. There was no reference to our history. No emotional undertones. Just business. He signed the contract the following morning. Digital signature. Time-stamped. Years ago he told me I couldn't operate without his network. Now his company required my structure. I didn't raise my rates. I didn't delay the agreement. Authority doesn't need embellishment. It needs execution. When the signed document returned to my inbox, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt aligned. The contract wasn't revenge. It was a recalibration. Professional. Measured. Final. And that's often stronger than confrontation. We began immediately. The first 2 weeks were diagnostic, deep system mapping, data flow audits, and cross-department interviews. I moved quietly through their infrastructure, identifying bottlenecks that had been patched instead of repaired. My brother attended the strategy briefings without interruption. He asked questions now. Not to challenge. To understand. We froze non-essential rollout features. Rebuilt integration pipelines. Consolidated overlapping tools that had been deployed in haste. I reassigned resources to stabilization teams rather than expansion marketing. The numbers began correcting within a month. Shipment delays decreased. Forecasting accuracy improved. Vendor complaints quieted. The company didn't announce a turnaround. It simply stopped bleeding. During our fourth progress meeting, my brother spoke differently. Thank you for restructuring this, he said without qualifiers. It wasn't praise. It was an acknowledgement. The executives listened when I spoke. Implementation followed discussion. There was no resistance, only recalibration. The correction didn't require spectacle. It required alignment. Years ago he believed I lacked the foundation to succeed. Now he was operating within the framework I built. Quiet correction rarely feels dramatic, but it lasts longer than arrogance ever does. The Thanksgiving laughter doesn't sting anymore. Feels instructive. They called it jobless. I called it preparation. Preparation for a market shift they didn't see coming. Preparation for an industry that would reward structure over stability. Preparation for a moment when expertise would matter more than titles. I don't resent my brother. He measured success the way he was taught to measure its office space hierarchy. I measured it differently: architecture, adaptability, and foresight. Neither path was wrong, but only one was prepared for disruption. When his company stabilized, no one announced that I had been right. There was no public acknowledgement of irony. No apology delivered across a dinner table. There didn't need to be. Competence doesn't require vindication. It requires consistency. I didn't prove him wrong. I built something he eventually needed. And that difference matters. Success isn't loud. It accumulates. It compounds quietly until the room has no choice but to recalibrate. They called it jobless. I called it preparation. And preparation doesn't ask for permission. It simply waits for its moment.